Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Arlington campus of George Mason University, and to those of you that are online. I'm Jerry McGinn, the Executive Director for the Center for Government Contracting, the School of Business here at GMU. And we're very excited to have you for our first in-person and online event in 16 months. So it's been a while, but it's good to be back. Most of you are participating online, but we do have a few folks here in person. And this is our intent, is to do this going forward so we can have maximum in-person and online engagement. So we're very excited to do this event. So today we're going to be talking about additive manufacturing or 3D printing. Most of you all know that by the term 3D printing. Additive is burst on the scene over a decade ago in defense circles, but it's been around for, actually the roots are much longer than that. What's been interesting is that although additive has developed all kinds of spare parts, the implementation of it in the overall acquisition system in the Department of Defense has not been as quick as many anticipated. Some of that has to do with certification issues or reliability of parts and the like. So, but that may be changing now. So what we're here to talk about is this new instruction, the Department of Defense instruction, 5000.93, the use of additive manufacturing in the Department of Defense. So this, as with any Department of Defense instruction, it sets the roles, responsibilities for organizations across the department. It's a policy document to implement a specific initiative. In this case, it's how do we use additive manufacturing in the department for programs and spare parts and the like. So, and to do that, we're very, very fortunate. We have a keynote speaker that I'll introduce shortly, and then we have a dynamite panel representing both industry, the Defense Acquisition University, as well as the one of the key consumers of additive manufacturing, the Department of the Air Force. So let's kick us off. First, we're going to have Ms. Tracy Frost, who will be our keynote speaker. Ms. Frost is the director of the DoD Manufacturing Technology Program, or ManTech. She's had that role since 2016. And in addition to running the ManTech program for the Office of Secure Defense, part of that responsibility includes the DoD-sponsored Manufacturing Innovation Institutes. And the original, and there are, I believe, 9 of those now, right? So the most recent was on synthetic biology, which rolled out late last year. But the original MII is America Makes, which is focused on additive. So she's got a rich history and a knowledge of that area, and we're excited to have the executive director of America Makes here today. So in her current role, she's responsible for serving cross-cutting defense manufacturing needs and stimulating the early development of manufacturing processes, enterprise business practices to achieve cost-effective solutions that enable our warfighter. So these MIIs, they've resulted in over almost $1 billion of federal investment, and more importantly, over $1.65 billion in cost share from industry, academia, and state governments to help build these institutes across the country. Ms. Frost has a Bachelor of Science in Ocean Engineering from Florida Atlantic University and a Master of Science in Engineering Management from George Washington University here. So I'd like to welcome up Tracy to speak, and then we'll come back after that with the panel. So thanks, Tracy.
Great. Thanks, Dr. McGinn, for the introduction. Appreciate it. And it's my pleasure to help open this event to provide an overview of the first ever DoD-wide additive manufacturing policy. This policy is the DoD Instruction, as Dr. McGinn mentioned, 5000.93, entitled The Use of Additive Manufacturing in DoD. The policy was issued to support the implementation and use of AM technology and provide more consistent operations across our enterprise. My office, under the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, is the lead for promoting all advanced manufacturing technologies, and we've partnered with the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment on this policy to lead the charge to strengthen our industrial base and our defense industrial base with this policy. As again, Dr. McGinn mentioned, AM has been around for a long time, but as it's being utilized today, it's cutting edge technology. It's distributable, distributed and accessible through its smaller footprint and its lower cost. It's innovative, allowing us to create new designs like we've never seen before. And it allows us to iterate and prototype more quickly, supporting rapid design cycles. All of these are game-changing technologies. So before I get into describing the actual instruction and walking through the instruction, I want to tell you a little bit about how we got here and a little bit about the strategic approach that DoD is taking for AM. Over the last several years, we've really seen strong alignment across the department and with our industry partners on activities in additive manufacturing and, frankly, all advanced manufacturing technologies that are a priority for the department. We created and are implementing an overarching strategic approach with AM. Again, within DoD, with our industry partners, this will increase collaboration, accelerate progress, and standardize practices. We started off providing a structure for collaboration. So I remember quite a few years ago taking a lunch break at the Pentagon and sitting in a small room that we can find with a few people across other offices, trying to figure out how are we going to come together to really accelerate AM. We know there's pockets of work going on around the department, but how do we bring people together to really move it forward in a more structured fashion? That group is now called JAMWIG, the Joint Additive Manufacturing Working Group. That group then identified urgent areas of need and joint areas. Some have short runways, others, as they say, are the long poles in the tent. We then set a vision and set strategic goals, and it's all been formalized in this policy. And I'll give you a quick preview of the next steps, and I'll talk a little bit more detail later, but the next steps are develop more detailed guidance to support the implementation of that policy. So let me go back. I mentioned JAMWIG. I want to give you a little bit more detail about that group and some of the ongoing work that they have going on right now. The group was formalized in 2017. It now consists of 20 key principles, which are between the OSD offices, the military services, and the defense agencies. However, the group brings together over 200 people across the department that work in additive manufacturing. The objective of this group is to, bottom line, coordinate and collaborate with AM across the department. How we do that is by identifying, again, these common issues and work to solve them together. So together we can buy down through the cost, we can buy down risk, and we can accelerate the timelines. Our current annual joint priority list aligns to three major common challenge areas that were identified. 1, qualification and certification. 2, digital thread and data sharing. And the 3rd, workforce development. I think that's a key area, workforce development, that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle when we're working on advancing technology. We kind of forget about that workforce piece. And I think through the work through our institutes, again, Dr. McGinn mentioned our 9 manufacturing innovation institutes, that has really been a key component to the success of implementing technologies, ensuring that we are training the workforce at the same time so that when it is implemented, the workforce is ready to engage. I also want to go through a few examples of some projects that the JAMWIG has taken to really take action on forwarding the technology. These projects have been funded out of my office and in collaboration with other offices throughout the department and other federal agencies. So the first project I want to talk about is identifying and launching a metal AM database. This project is in partnership with DoD, with the FAA, where this is going to be used to accelerate the qualification of metal AM parts. We have several research and development projects to understand the corrosion of additively manufactured components. We've also working on identifying the AM training needs for both inside the department and with industry based on certain job roles. And we are defining and refining a joint platform to share 3D model prints, 3D print models through a system called JAMX. It's the Joint Additive Manufacturing Model Exchange. It's a tool that's now fully operational, up and running, and it's hosted by the Defense Logistics Agency. So let me go back as well. I mentioned the strategy. So let me talk about the strategy, the common vision, and the strategic goals that are laid out in that strategy. I'm going to read to you the vision statement in that strategy. Additive manufacturing enables a more agile, adaptable, and aligned defense supply base to outpace adversarial threats. It's a pretty simple vision statement, but it's pretty impactful when you think about what goes into actually making that vision happen. That was published, as I mentioned, in our first ever DoD-wide additive manufacturing strategy, and that came out in January, so earlier this year, January of 2021. So I mentioned there were also 5 goals. I'm going to read you through the goals. First, integrate AM into DoD and the defense industrial base. Again, sounds simple, but as we know, it is not. Align AM activities across the department and with our external partners. That's a key note that you'll hear throughout my talk here today, is that it's very important to us. Over and over, you'll hear me talk about collaboration and coordination. And it's not just within the department, which is big when you're trying to coordinate across a lot of different offices, but also our industry partners. We think that is really key. And you'll hear that over and over mentioning as we're performing certain activities, we're including our industry partners. Going back to the goals, the third one is advance and promote agile use of AM. Number 4, expand proficiency in AM. So learn, practice, share knowledge. Start over. Learn, practice, share knowledge. The 5th is secure the AM workflow, important in our work for national security. So to help us enable the DoD vision and support the national security goals through advanced manufacturing technologies, I want to talk a little bit about the 9 manufacturing innovation institutes that were mentioned earlier. These are whole of government efforts. They're led through public-private partnerships that we have with industry. They're focused on technology development, education and workforce development, and supporting the supply chain ecosystem that surrounds each one of those areas. There's 9 different manufacturing areas. I'm not going to go into all of them, but today we have the CEO and executive director of America Makes, which Dr. McGinn mentioned was the first institute we stood up. So thank you, John, for paving the way with us. And that America Makes focuses on bringing together industry, academia, and government to address the barriers of using AM. So now I'm going to focus on the policy that we're actually here to discuss today. I'm going to break down the different sections of the policy and kind of talk through the different aspects. I obviously need to summarize, so I do recommend that if you haven't already, please go read the policy, take a look at it. If there are questions, you can follow up with our office. But I think it's important to really hear the details. So in the policy, it does a few things. It establishes overall policy and guidance for the department. I think very importantly, it outlines roles and responsibilities. So it denotes different offices within the department and clearly defines the swim lanes each of those departments work in to create this whole of effort. So if you have questions about certain aspects, hopefully we're leading you sort of to the right place. But again, if you want to contact our office, we're happy to get you to the right office, depending on what you're looking for. And then it provides overarching guidance in 8 critical areas, and I'll review those in a minute as well. But let's start with section 1 of the policy. Section 1 talks about how the department is moving forward to develop and use AM in areas that are most beneficial to the department. Those areas are forward deployment, maintenance operations and supply chains, increasing logistics resiliency, and improving our warfighter readiness. This policy will help to apply additive manufacturing as appropriate to our DoD industrial base and to modernize our weapon systems. It also will help justify and guide additive manufacturing investments in research, in training our personnel, and using the technology securely. And finally, I've said this before, but it bears repeating, this policy will align activities to accelerate the use of AM. All right, so that's the overall policy section. Section 2 is what I mentioned the roles and responsibility. So again, there are a lot listed. I can't go through all of them, but I'm going to touch on all of the offices and a little bit about what they are responsible for. So again, my office is out of the Research and Engineering office. We are responsible for overall for this policy and the policy implementation. We drive research and development. We facilitate common training of the workforce. We support the consistent use of qualification certification approaches. We measure and track the progress and enable the secure use of AM. To help us out, we've got the DoD Chief Information Officer that ensures that DoD information technology environment can support AM implementation. Our partners that I mentioned earlier in the acquisition and sustainment community, they will resource and ensure the acquisition and sustainment programs have resources and guidance to support the implementation. They will use the common standards and specifications as appropriate. They'll promote the use of AM in new weapon systems, and they'll update business practices and support the additive manufacturing supply chain. The Defense Logistics Agency I mentioned earlier hosts JAMX. They will continue to host other interoperable data management tools as they're developed and as JAMX continues to grow. And they also help to establish processes and procedures to integrate AM into our supply chain. You have the secretaries of the military departments, the directors of the defense agencies, and the DoD field activities that have AM requirements. They will also ensure resourcing and guidance to our acquisition and sustainment programs and guidance and support to implementation. They will use those common standards and specifications as appropriate, ensure that the workforce across those agencies are adequately trained, and they will document the use of AM items. Again, we talked about sharing that knowledge and that circle of learning. That will definitely be part of it. You also have, the last office noted is the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. So they support coordination across joint programs and assist the military departments in forward deployment. Okay, so now we're up to section 3. Section 3 is the procedure and guidance. I mentioned earlier there's 8 critical areas that are outlined with guidance in this policy. I'm going to walk through those again quickly, but again, recommend that you read the policy in more detail because I'm paraphrasing. And you'll hear some of these repeated. These are areas of guidance that will certainly align to some of the offices that I just mentioned in the work that they're doing. But the first one is additive manufacturing in acquisition. So that community is to drive the use and consideration of AM for new weapon systems and ensure that DoD has access to the data needed for the maintenance and sustainment community. The Research and Engineering Department are responsible for conducting the research that will accelerate and benefit the AM community. A lot of that is to speed up the qualification certification process. Another area of guidance that's noted in the policy is the integration into the supply chain. We need to have common practices, develop interoperable systems, mark and manage the parts appropriately, and track and measure our progress. You also have data management. Another one of those easy things, right? In data management, we need to be able to share information, use best practices to extract the maximum value of AM data available, and also leverage interoperable systems like I mentioned with GMX. There's also data equipment and security, an even harder problem, but we need to make sure that all systems and data are adequately protected. I get to the next section, which is the next area of guidance is specification and standards. We need to try to leverage industry standards where possible. Where it's not possible, the department needs to create and share specs and standards according to policy. The second to last area is training and education. I mentioned earlier, we wholeheartedly believe that is a really critical part to advancing the integration of any manufacturing technology into our community. So the guidance is to provide training to our applicable workforce, and we know that that is beyond just our technical workforce, and support the development of AM, the body of knowledge, and share it, and create educational opportunities. And the final area, it's noted, again, another repeated theme you'll see in this discussion is collaboration. We actually note in there that we will actively collaborate and share best practices. It's so important. So in closing, I want to talk about some of the next steps that we have in front of us. So I've talked about developing the AM strategy for the department. I've talked about the first ever DoD-wide policy that captures that top level guidance. And the next steps will be creating even more detailed guidance. So the services are creating implementation plans they're revising their plans or they're developing new ones that will incorporate this policy. We'll also have a joint working group that's a subgroup that's developing an AM guidebook. So that guidebook will offer detailed processes and procedures based on the policy. The plan for that guidebook is to be published in FY22, so next year. As we continue to mature, the technology matures, we'll continue to mature the guidance right along with it and the policy. We'll continue to work with industry to expand the use of the technology. And I really look forward to these next steps and continuing to work with all of you in the AM community. I do want to thank George Mason University, Dr. McGinn, and America Makes for hosting this event. It was a fantastic opportunity for us to get the word out about this new policy. I want to thank you all for your participation, both here in person and virtually. And thank you to the distinguished leaders on our panel. I'm excited to listen to you today to talk about how this policy will affect your work going forward. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Dr. McGinn.
Thanks, Tracy. That was dynamite. It was great to hear you go through in detail the additive manufacturing instruction and then implications for the department and industry. So I'd like to welcome our panelists up to the stage and have a seat. And while they're doing that, I want to thank America Makes for co-hosting this event with us. And for those that are new to the center, I encourage you to check out our upcoming events and our recent publications. So if you go to if you go to govcon.gmu.edu, you'll find it. You should have a link to it in some of your registration materials. We have a number of new white papers out and a number of events coming up, including our conference that we co-host every year with DAU, and that's going to be on November 3rd at the Crystal City Marriott. That is also going to be in person, but we will also have a Zoom option for those that want to do virtually. But we're excited to move into this hybrid world where we have more personal contact, but also get to include others that from across the country and across the world. So we're going to move now. I'm going to move back to my seat and join the panelists, and we look forward to continuing the discussion. Great. So you have in your registration materials, you have the full bios of our distinguished panelists. So I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that, but I want to welcome our panelists. We have from my left, your right, we have Ms. Angie Timofeychik, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Logistics and Product Support, based here in headquarters, U.S. Air Force. And so she has direct responsibility for additive and for product support. So we're looking very much for her perspective. We have Mr. Frank Kelly, who's the Vice President for Defense Acquisition University, as a regular partner of ours, and it's really great to see him, have him talk about the education implications of additive. And we have Mr. John Wilczynski, who's the Executive Director for America Makes, who gives us the industry perspective on AM. So let me start with Angie. So what are the implications of this policy for the Air Force? I mean, the Air Force, they build a few things, they have a few things that fly, even in space, and additive has a big future in parts and so on. So how is the Air Force looking at manufacturing, and how does this policy, new policy and instruction, how do you see that impacting the Air Force going forward?
Thank you. And first, let me say you did a great job on my last name there. It's not easy to do. So
you trained me well.
Let me first say that within the Air Force, really, there's a great partnership between myself and my partner, Kristen Baldwin, who is on the science and engineering side of the house. So I'm logistics and product support. I talk about how the legacy systems can bring in the new technology, and she talks more on the new system. So it's really a twofold effort within the Air Force for the adoption of additive manufacturing. So new design, there's no doubt that we can create new capability in ways that were never, ever manufacturable before. But also, my portfolio is on the sustainment side. We have systems that are well over 50 years old. We have issues with diminishing manufacturing sources and with obsolescence. And we have old manufacturing techniques that require very long lead times to procure. So that impacts the readiness of our fleets, right? So we're looking at how we can bring in these new technologies to really get at those problems. And on the logistics side too. So pure logistics from the point of manufacture to the point of need. How can we reduce that logistics footprint in terms of time and weight? Think about the new side of the Department of the Air Force, which is Space Force. Whole new issues there when we're talking about reducing the weight that we have to launch for supply on orbit. So there's a whole gamut of issues there yet. We're following industry, right? Yet to be addressed on that respect. But in terms of the policy, what we find so exciting, two things. The Air Force has been down this path for about 2 years now. So we saw the need. We have technology that's becoming more and more readily available and highly innovative airmen, right? So you put the two together. How do we make sure that they have the right safety guardrails so they know what can and can't be done from an operational safety, suitability, and effectiveness of our weapon system, right? So we need these guardrails in place. We had strong policies in our Air Force Material Command, which is where we develop and acquire things. What about the using MAJCOMs? So how do we bring them into that fold? So we started down this path 2 years ago to define roles and responsibilities, to define the offices, to define the workforce requirements and training skills and all of that. And so we worked in close coordination with the DoDI Instruction group. And just before this DoDI was issued, we issued a guidance memo within the Air Force as well. Addressed all of those things. Identified our Rapid Sustainment Office, PEO, as our accountable office within the Department of the Air Force. So we were thrilled when the DoDI came out. And actually already we have the Air Force supplement ready to go out into coordination that says this is where we're going to do it as a department. So we're very anxious to see the next steps in this and to work with Tracy and her office on how we further this. And I can go on, but I'll save my comments for some of the future questions.
Great. Well, you kind of lead us right into John's wheelhouse, which is so you represent a lot of additive manufacturing companies, startups, big companies, not just in defense, but in other, in automotive and so on. So how are you seeing from the industry's perspective? Do you see this helping kind of the demand signal or helping get more certification? What is your perspective on the instruction?
No, perfect question, perfect segue. I think it is something that we've been working at this for going on 9 years now, trying to coordinate the industry and bring everyone together. And, our historic approach around that has been, how do we get everyone together and try to figure out what to work on next? And, we use the term road mapping, and we've done a lot of that in a lot of different areas, whether it's technology or on the education side or in the standards space, which I see a lot of connection between what we're talking about here. Because where we're at today, we've seen quite a bit of technical evolution where we are more capable. We have a better understanding of what the tools can do and how to use them and where we can utilize the technology within our weapon systems and within other industries. So we then have to, as that is real and becoming more and more real, we insert this new community and more manufacturers. So when the group is really tight and small, everything's still hard, but it's a bit easier because there's not as many players engaged in the conversation. As there is more opportunity and people see, that additive is a potential growth opportunity for their business, they start to look at how can they get engaged. So things like this policy are really important because they understand, they provide coordination. They provide a tool to communicate what the rules are or how to get engaged. I was just, interesting enough, having a conversation with an aerospace OEM, we'll say, last week, and they were talking about how impactful we were reflecting on some, of the earliest projects at the Institute and what do they mean, and trying to understand the impact that they had, now 8 years later. And one comment that he mentioned really stuck with me that aligns to your question was that without something like, we were talking about public-private partnerships, but I see it the same way for this type of policy. Without these kinds of documents, everyone is left to try to figure everything out on their own. So being able to, have something like this that the biggest OEMs can understand and provide comment on, and maybe more importantly, the small manufacturers understand how to get engaged. We then have a capability that we can actually utilize. So I think it's a big step forward as we try to really implement this technology. Awareness is growing. We're now at the point where it's all becoming real. So we need, everyone needs something to be able to, whether it's buying off a part or understanding how to sell a component, policy and standards are really important for our small businesses to be able to do that.
Now, you have the government perspective on AM and then the industry perspective, but a lot of it then will then flow down into the workforce. How do how do they incorporate additive into their work as in the overall acquisition process? So, and that's sort of your bailiwick, I think, Frank, and DAUs, and I think you already do a fair amount of additive training, but how do you see this instruction kind of impacting what you all do at DAU?
So I think, a knee-jerk reaction, could be another thing to teach the workforce about without any of the additional people, additional funds, and, so how are you going to do that? But I honestly mean this, and I can actually demonstrate. I am personally very, very excited about additive manufacturing. I have an Ender 3 Pro at home, and I don't make little statues of cats and dogs. I make stuff that works in my house. And if you get really, really bored, you can just make stuff that makes your Ender 3 Pro work better. I am a real believer in that this is an exciting time for defense and an exciting way for our forces to operate in the future. When John says that we've been doing this, that we've been thinking about this for 10 years, I will say that I'm not sure that DAU has been thinking about it for 10 years. And we're really lucky. We have who I consider to be the godfather of logistics at DAU. He's an Air Force guy, by the way, so I'm sure that our Air Force folks will be really happy about that. Bill Coburn, a fantastic leader. One of the things that makes him really fantastic is he lets his smart people do the work they need to do. So on point for this whole additive manufacturing effort is Carla O'Connor, who I'm looking at right now. Those of you at home cannot see her, but I'm looking at her right now. And so I think that, an organization is serious about stuff when they assign people and let them spend their time to do it. And then, more importantly, let them go and run with it. And Carla has run with it. Now, instead of doing what we might have done in the old day, and that is come up with a class, 300 to 400 PowerPoint slides, we're not doing that. Carla has exercised the contact that she has within OSD, and I think a tremendous relationship that's already focused on training that workforce. I believe that I saw a document that you actually signed that said we are going to do this. This is really important, and I apologize. I'm looking at Tracy Frost on that one. And it's not PowerPoint. It's actually videos with people talking about how this gets done and gets accomplished. And so if you get a chance to take a look at DAU's additive manufacturing channel, I think what you'll do is you'll get a really good perspective on how DAU sees that this training is going to get accomplished. Now, Tracy, one thing that I will say is the one thing that you probably don't want us to do is to interpret what you thought about when you made this policy, when you were honchoing this policy. Okay, people know how to read policy. We can stick it out there. That's all going to work out. But the thing that I don't think the services want us to do is tell them how to do their business either, especially when it appears. Now, I'm not trying to make a shameless career move here. That the Air Force is already adding a supplement to their policy that they put out. They are way ahead. I'm a Marine. I would say that the Marine Corps could probably take a lesson or two here from what the Air Force is doing. In industry would really probably like to have a better insight on how do we gain access? How do we actually get our entree into this this effort of additive manufacturing? I think the best thing that DAU can do is to continue to convey at that very top level the spirit and intent of the policy that you had out there. And this idea of collaboration is absolutely critical. I think the one other thing that I will say, the little Frank Kelly thing that I want to make sure that we do, this is not just the domain of logisticians. We can't let the logisticians get away with that, okay, by the way, because it would be great to hold on to it. It's terribly exciting. You get to do this stuff at home, geek out at home. It's everybody's business. And we have to create education opportunities, experiences, quite frankly, out there that get everybody involved. Get the PM involved, get the contracting officer involved, let the logistician take lead, but where it makes most sense, engineers for sure. And there's countless other folks that need to understand what the potential of this additive manufacturing effort is going to be in the future.
Great. Awesome.
I can't
Andrew,
let-
go ahead.
I can't let that go. So I'm a recovering engineer, right? So I appreciate your comment. So logistics is, they're the demanding customer, right? And so they're the ones saying, I need this, I need this. There's training and there's workforce development that happens on the use of the machines, the use of the equipment, the accountable systems of record and how we do that. But on the flip side, on the workforce, is the training, the environment that we create to allow the engineers to accept it, right? So there's that whole other dynamic ongoing. And we have, I mentioned earlier, as a result of some of Rob Gold's activities within his forums, within the Air Force have a transition of manufacturing technologies working group. So how do we get, and this is primarily engineering, but logistics is engaged in that from a product support side. How do we get the engineering community to embrace the use, my interest, of additive in the legacy portfolio? So we've got a whole other series of workforce development activities ongoing to that end as well.
Great. So many things to unpack here, but let me start with one. The lead in the policy itself is that DoD will seek to use AM to support Joint Force Commanders and CCMD theater requirements. That's command commands, and then supply chain logistics and so on. So that interesting, putting the Joint Force first and leads to the question of, there's been stories and about 3D printers in theater, in use, and so on. How is that working from a service perspective and in the field? And do you see that increasing, or is that sort of something that's is kind of niche-y and then hasn't really kind of gone forward? So, and then where are companies, and to be honest, a lot of this, is the department creating the right demand signal for industry to really kind of innovate in these spaces? So I'll throw that.
I'll start on that. So we growing, I would say, the use of additive across the operational, let's say, Air Force, using MAGCOMs and beyond. We have innovation spark cells across the Air Force where their whole intent is put these innovative technologies and processes in the hands of, again, our highly creative and innovative airmen and see what they can do. And that is exactly why a couple of years ago, we started down this path. When our chief of staff says, how many 3D printers do we have across the Air Force? That's a good question. Now we have an accountable property system that we are tracking all the printers across the Air Force. So really having that policy in place to say, these are the printers, this is the training associated with it, this is how you mark and track parts, is what's so important about both the DoD and the Air Force supplement.
You have anything to add, John?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question I think we've all been wrestling with for the last, for years now, really, is where and when do you make parts? Is putting tools really forward in the fight makes sense? I think, everyone's answer to that is obviously yes, because of the innovation that comes out of the folks that are actually fighting the fight every day. And I think the questions then, we're all asking ourselves is how do we take advantage of that? How do we extract that knowledge out of them and then feed it back into the system so that we're improving designs as we put them out the next time? And at the same time, if we're going, in parallel paths, or there's more than two, obviously, and starting to train people and getting them familiar with and aware of the technology and how to use them. We're still today, in most cases, replacing a widget with an additively manufactured widget, which if we need that widget right now, it's a wonderful solution. You know, I won't speak for the Air Force, but we as an industry are really trying to push for how can we make this widget more effective or consolidate these widgets so that it's something that we didn't have before. So, you know, this is a big movement that we're taking on. And yes, we've been at it for years, decades, really, you know, across the technology. But again, it's about, as you introduce more and more circles of folks involved in the discussion, it all gets a lot harder. So you go from, you know, tens to hundreds to tens of thousands at this point that are able to touch tools. I mean, I think across all the services, they have similar stories. That's fantastic. It's now about how do we push that back? And I think industry, ultimately, we have a lot of discussion around in different forums about this. How can they be part of it, to your point? How does that help support their demand signal? They all want to deliver better systems and components individually. They need information in order to be able to do that. And I think I'd be interested in your perspective on this, but I don't see the services, you know, trying to plant flags and say, well, we're going to make this stuff now, and, you know, starting to put their arms around it from industry. And I think most people understand that we're just trying to kind of navigate through that because we're still doing it on, you know, a part by part basis right now.
And if I may answer that, because that's a key point, in that as we're developing these databases, these warehouses of our tech data packages for these AM parts, so the intent is we will always, from a mission readiness perspective, if we have a one-off and we can do it, we'll do it. The intent is never to compete with industry, right? So I really see all the JAMX, and for us, it's Agora, are the databases that we're putting together, storefronts moving forward, really eliminating that barrier to entry. So we're bringing more commercial industry in. That's good for them. That's good for us. We don't no longer no bid or single source vendors, and it really allows industry to grow their DoD, their defense portfolio, like we've never seen.
Great. If folks here have any questions, or folks online, just use the Q&A function. I got an iPad right here. I can read your questions. Likewise here, just raise your hand. So can I pull the thread a little bit more on that, Angie? So the issue, it's not a chicken and egg thing, but, you know, a lot of the challenge has been with 3D printing or additive in recent years has been, you know, you have to certify the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army, the Marine Corps, and the like have to, and the Navy have to certify a part, right? They have to say this part is airworthiness in the case of the Air Force or like. So do you see that kind of, is the technology getting better so that you can actually certify that? And then, so do you see that increasing, and what does this policy and some of the relationships help that going forward? So
I would say we still have a lot of work to do, and I'd be interested in John's perspective on that. But where we are today, these policies instill the standards and the specs that we need to all march towards. So a lot of work to be done still, but if we establish the baseline and then can say, if you're doing it in this fashion, again, the technology, I think, needs to probably catch up still. But we're instilling the practices and the processes through this policy and as we move forward. And I remember, so back years ago, I worked with America Makes on the Mammals project, which was trying to qualify families of parts. So there are various activities going on through the years trying to attack that problem. I'll let you address, John, where we are in the state of technology today.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect question, perfect lead in. Those kind of programs, there's actually a whole series of projects right now, which kind of highlight something that Tracy opened with, where the JAMWIG, so the joint services all came together and identified, and there's a series of different subcommittees or stakeholder councils, they're called, underneath the JAMWIG that focus on different, you know, parts of the AM problem. And one of them that was addressed and ultimately, you know, funded through OSD was this series of projects focused on advanced tools for rapid qualification. So how can we get to the point where we as a community have a better understanding of what is okay And, when it comes down to the science and the, maybe boring to some and very interesting to many others is the nuts and bolts of where defects are and is it okay or not? And does it matter for this part family or that part family? There's a lot of work that's still going on and needs to be done. But I think something that's really important as it, ties back into the policy is it's work with folks like the Jamway who are organizing the need on the government side and connecting them with those that are ultimately producing the product on the industrial side, and obviously insert academics in there to help address the gaps. We have a whole subset of our own advisory and working groups that directly align up to all of these stakeholder councils, and we meet regularly and share information back and forth to make sure that it is a situation where we are openly exchanging between the government and industry what their needs are and where capabilities are today. And again, to me, it goes back to this comment I just got from this aerospace OEM. He said, without that, they can solve whatever problem you put in front of them. I mean, most big organizations or small businesses could do that if you could tell them what you wanted. Their situation is everything's a problem. That obviously is not something anyone can address, no matter how big you are. So these kinds of activities are really important, and policy like this, ultimately drives to a next step where we, coordination starts to happen. We then take some action, and hopefully that all starts to then translate into standards and specifications that when you want to, so going back to, acquisition professionals, that's great that I know that part A or B is good or bad. How do you buy it? How do you put a system in place so that it's okay to say yes to this new technology that we didn't consider when we designed it 50 years ago? So it takes all of these pieces working together. I think.
And a risk-based approach, right? So there are certain categories, like we worked on knobs. So, you can accept risk in that, not on a flight critical part. So years ago, I don't know if it's still current, the Marine Corps bended into these go do whenever you need to, these you have to ask, these don't touch. And that was a risk-based approach into our use of additive.
Gotcha. Frank, I wonder if we could turn to you, talk to some of the DU perspective. I mean, as Carla builds out kind of the efforts for DAU, how do you draw from past experience on best ways to educate the workforce on this new technology and, and lessons learned as you kind of try to do your effort going forward?
Okay, so ask for a little bit of perspective. So my perspective might go beyond my DAU experience, if that's okay. And you're right to point out, Carla, I'd probably go to Carla and say, how are we going to proceed with this, Carla? But one thing I'd like to kind of do is just orient us back on something that Tracy said that I thought was really, really important. And I would say that a million years ago, sometimes at a course or in our training, let's just say it was like young Captain Frank Kelly, and I thought I was going to be quizzed on a policy. Well, I'd have to know all the chapters in the policy, and I'd have to know all the other instructions that are called out. And I think, again, going back to this, the intent and the spirit and intent of the policy, I think is really important. And think about the words that were used. Tracy used collaboration. John just used building a community. I think that's really important. I'm not so sure about the never touch thing anymore. Carla's got a video of a guy out there by the name of Scott Storms. He's an engineer that came out of Philadelphia, I think, someplace. He's got a story on there how there was this gear that if you don't perform the maintenance on this gear assembly quite properly, okay, you don't do the sequence right, you shear some of the teeth off the top drive gear, you break it, okay? And they were in a situation. There was a kid, I don't know if he was like an E3 or below, but he made a gear-like thing out of a coffee can. Two things that were shocking in the video. Yes, the Navy still buys their coffee and it comes in cans, which is terrible. We shouldn't be doing that to anybody anymore. They pride themselves on bad coffee and they deserve, every accolade they get for it. And yet it wasn't additive manufacturing, but they cut this thing out. And it got them so far, and then it eventually failed, okay? Nobody died. And what did they do? They found another can of coffee, made another gear, and continued to drive. I will tell you from my own experience, if somebody told me that, let's say I had to get from Kadena, so I had to get, like 300 miles. And if I knew that I could get like 150 miles on a gear, on something that I could replace on a coffee can, maybe, I don't know, now that I think about it, my wife wouldn't be too happy about that. And then get a new thing, put in, a new assembly or LRU, however we want to say it, and do the other 150 miles. I think I'd go with that, on an interim basis. And I think that, so one of the things I wrote down, easy for me to say, engineer, but not a logistician. And that is, and I don't remember reading it, so I apologize, but are we now going to design components with adaptive manufacturing in mind? And I think that's a critical new philosophy, right? Because we want these things to last forever. We expect them to last forever. We're shocked when they don't last forever. And yet that's not unrealistic. But I think if we started at least thinking about designing for things like adaptive manufacturing, I think that would give us a whole new thought process.
So it's almost like you're talking about, disposable or, additive,
Yeah.
that is not designed for forever, right? And so that gets sort of, when you do the certification process, Angie, is it is it a risk-based analysis and how much you need to do that? How much certification? How good does it have to be? Because I mean, I think you are dealing with platforms that are decades old, and so how do you all kind of rack and stack that?
Well, I'd say two things. I'd say Air Force has a little bit different issues than if we're talking about a ground vehicle. So if we're talking about an aircraft that can only fly for 150 miles or whatever, might have a different issue. It might be a risk too far that you want to take. So there's a whole different flair within our community. The other issue that we face in terms of how much is good enough is the way within our department we've driven down the operational safety, suitability, and effectiveness evaluation. It's driven down to the individual chief engineer on that weapon system. So that's the practice we're trying to pull up now from that transition of manufacturing technology working group I mentioned. Can we elevate that decision-making based on standard practices and policies in place to take that risk out of the individual chief engineers and bring it up potentially a level? Because right now it's individually driven by what that particular chief engineer needs in terms of data and testing, et cetera. So really trying to bring that up if possible. Because right now it will take some policy changes. It is driven down to that individual weapon system level.
Jerry, sorry.
No.
One other thing that Tracy said, and when she was going through the policy, and she talked about the first chapter, and she said something really important. It's all about readiness, right? So how does this impact readiness? And I think that sometimes that is not a metric that everybody in our acquisition process is thinking about. They want the golden part. And I think that this is a great opportunity with new technology. That new technology tends to bring people together that have not necessarily talked before in the past. And readiness is the language that everybody in the defense enterprise should be thinking about. And the folks that are really going to accept that risk at the end really are these combatant commanders, by the way, that you mentioned. We got to, I think, bringing them into that conversation, as well. Are they willing to accept something that would only let them go, say, 150 miles? But readiness, I think, is really the key, and it's something that I think we can kind of like motivate everybody to understand what does readiness really mean. And I think adaptive manufacturing can enhance readiness, absolutely, for sure, and allow more missions to be accomplished.
Yeah, just one thing to add and maybe veer off in a different direction. I think so. I completely agree with everything you guys just walked through, but I think then there's this next opportunity, which is where we as an additive community are trying to go. It's a challenge. Where are the situations where an additive component that doesn't, or just a system that doesn't actually need to last for 10,000 hours or 100,000 hours, whether it's a one-way type system or just something that now that we are moving to more autonomous, flight and just systems in general, what does that mean for us? So, it's easy to ask the question, really hard to get to the point where we know, again, I'm sure this is significant policy change in order to be in a position for any of those folks to say yes. How do we push it back to the design community so we're even asking the right questions about, does this component really need to last for X number of hours, and what does that mean, and how do we use that to reduce costs to field systems at some number X faster than what we're able to do today. I think those are all the things that the tech community is really interested in. So again, try to pull it back to the policy here. If you were to put that in front of the folks who are working on different design optimizations or physics-based models to try to prove something out, if you could put a box around it, it's easier for them to answer those questions. Hopefully, policy starts to continue to push things back to some, common discussion where people know, or the folks that you're buying systems from understand what the needs are, and then they can much more quickly, address those needs. So I think it's all part of the problem, but it's a different new facet that is an opportunity because of the technology. But we have to understand, how do we say yes? And that's really difficult.
Question from the audience.
I'll start out by.
Sorry, the folks online couldn't hear those questions. It's not a bust idea. So, yeah. So the question essentially was, there's two parts, and the first part was on whether or not creating this policy really will help spur things or constrict things. Does it make it a DoD 5000 in the sense that it's too prescriptive and that kind of will stifle innovation? So that's the first one. The second one was more around how does it impact existing procedures or different in different areas. But let me.
So let me start by saying we learn something new every day, right? So we had these existing accountable property systems, but then there were these systems that didn't fit the mold, right? And so they were off being procured. Some of them on credit card, you can get them cheap, like the home models, and the innovation cells are doing it on a shoestring budget already. So it was, there is a way to accommodate it. We have systems of record, and we need to pull it in just to do the smart decision. So as new things pop up, we're always just surprised every day. What I will say I can't speak for the DoD. I can in terms of how it rolled into the Air Force. If you look at it, it's 8 pages. It's very high level. It's to tell you the general who's and what's, not the hows, right? And so when you get into it, even the Air Force supplement is not even 2 pages. So it establishes who is the responsible, how they do it, and some of the tools that we go into. Very high level, and the intent is not to make it prescriptive. It gets additional supplements as it goes deeper. But again, the original intent was safety guardrails. So it's not it is don't do this when it impacts OSS&E, we call it. But it's not don't do this in terms of an innovation. And if you be that demanding customer is what it's saying. And here's the people you go demand it of. And that's specific in the policy. So that was really the intent, not to say, don't do this. Here's the process of what you should be doing. So leverage the innovation out there into the appropriate channels. I hope that answers your question.
Anyone want to add to that?
So makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when somebody else starts comparing this to the 5,000, right? That's Aaron, right? Is that? And I'm looking at the guy that asked the question. For those of you out there, okay, see me for a chit later on. I want everybody to know DAU does not write the 5,000. By the way, I want to go back to. So I wasn't going to say this initially, but I will say now. I do think that there are parts of the policy that are a bit overprescribed initially, and I think that if we get a chance to go back and rewrite it, I agree with Angie, and I think that there's some of those things you might just want to take out. There are other parts that are absolutely brilliant. The one that talks to DAU, there's one specific mention of DAU in there, And I think it's really, really good. Yeah, I'm going to say that it was intentional, and it's that DEU is to teach, and it didn't give a list of a lot of things like, how to download your files from MakerBot, and, what type of filament to use. It just said teach related AM content, which I think is a wink and a nod to the fact that this is not just one thing, not just one community interest. The other thing, though, that I think is absolutely brilliant, and I mean, we could almost just leave it at that, is, and I'm going to paraphrase, it's 3.1 is the paragraph number. I do remember that, and that is, consider AM part of the acquisition process. And I think, because in essence, what we've done right now is, and I'm picking off something John said about our community and the design community, we've democratized with the addition of additive manufacturing. We have now democratized the opportunity to go out there and, let's say, a part breaks. I will guarantee you that there's probably some plane captain out there on one of the jets, that I would say, he goes, "Sir, that's the dumbest switch in the thing. I have a much better idea," but he would never be able to. "Don't touch that switch. It's going to be FOD. We're going to ground the airplane." Okay. But in today's environment, who's to say that kid is going to say, "And I already printed one for you, sir. If you just let me put it in the jet, we'll be good to go." And we probably will be good to go. Again, AM as part of the acquisition process. Now, let the services, the combatant commanders think, what does that mean? What does that mean in the future?
All right. If you have a question, you want to come up to the mic and ask the question? Well, the thing is, folks that are online won't be able to hear you, so sorry.
And then while we're waiting, I'll just say.
Oh, here, Tracy can give you her
No
mic.
one is perfect. So if we think we're perfect on this first iteration, then we're confusing ourselves.
That's what policy leaders and customers always want to know is, no one gets it right on the first time. How can we
Go ahead.
Hi there, I'm Michael Enking. I'm a brand new export control person with SAIC and under OUSD R&E. So my big question is the DoD policy earmarking specific AM processes, or are they trying to use a broad paintbrush over all of them? I mean, there's like what you had mentioned, you have the rapid prototyping or, using your 3D printer. But there are other ones that are out there. There's 7 other processes. Are you covering all those?
I'll speak for the Air Force. So we have within our Rapid Sustainment PEO, which is the organization responsible within the Air Force, we have the Advanced Manufacturing Program Office. Additive is one piece of that. So we have cold spray is one. You can call that additive, or you can call that a subset. They're looking at various different types of advanced manufacturing, and RSO will look at robotics, the composite arena. So it's advanced manufacturing, but this instruction is about an additive. Yeah. And I don't want to speak for the panel, but that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, I think our understanding or the interpretation is whether it is, powder bed or direct energy or a polymer extrusion system. It's written in a way that covers all additively manufactured components I would say, and I won't speak for those that wrote it, but, including cold spray, which you would not find as a recognized F-42. But I don't know if it's included or not, maybe. I guess for the Air Force it is.
Great questions. Thanks. Keep them coming. Frank, you talked a lot about readiness and how additive can help there, but there's sort of another part of partner of readiness, and it's security, right? So, and there's been a lot of focus on secure systems, and that's what your partner in crime, you mentioned Kristen Baldwin does in the Air Force, and Tracy's boss and big boss in R&E does. So, but there was a recent IG report that was released last week showing some cybersecurity gaps in how the department is using additive. Now, will DoD improve its cybersecurity practices for additive? And could cyber risks become an obstacle to more widespread adoption of AM across the department? That's one of our virtual questions.
So awareness, I think, is the, at least that would be the DAU role here in this part. So I do think that the policy actually does address, I think it's one of the things that it says that DAU will focus initially on things like IP and then technical data packages. And then I know that cyber is also a big concern. I think that Carla, and please, Carla O'Connor, it's an easy one to spell, find her, she'll be the one you want to talk to. I know she's got a plan, a strategy for how this stuff is going to get rolled out. Not only, go to that AM channel to get the stories, John, that you were talking about, which I think are really good conversation starters for folks, but also, a dedicated attention being focused. There's one that will be released this September, and it will address, the broader AM perspective. And it will mention things like intellectual property and tech data packages. And then another one that will get released the following year will have more case studies, which are really illustrative, right? They really help. They give you points of contact. They give you things that people were willing to try and how they worked within, and probably some, you hear on the backside, right? How people worked outside of, of the policies. But the cyber issue is a real concern, for sure. So I had a chance to work at Marine Corps Systems Command a number of years ago. And I can remember I had my NCIS guy come into my office and said, "Sir, we have a problem. We've just uncovered a counterfeit Humvee brake manufacturer, and they are deep, deep, deep within our supply chain." Wow. How does that happen? I'm afraid that adaptive manufacturing with not the proper security controls in place, we've made it quite easy. We've made it easier for counterfeit parts to get into the system, or, that could be a new form of attack. And so it's awareness for everybody. And again, and I pick on the logisticians. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be like Alexander the Great here, but by the way, when I say that, but it's not just the domain of logisticians, right? We need, as a matter of fact, the CIO is mentioned as the security focal point within this policy. I think that's definitely a good place to start, but it doesn't just stop there. I mean, everybody's got to be aware. Now, I think, by the way, it would be a great thing for DAU to come up with sort of like a class where all elements of the acquisition workforce are represented. Give them a problem where adaptive manufacturing might be the solution, and then we slip in a bad file and see if they catch it, before they go to print, and see if we're actually exercising good security procedures and protocols. Over.
Okay.
I like that, because in the Air Force, we do hack a satellite, hack an F-16, hack an AF printer. Maybe that's the package. The CIO is worth mentioning a little bit more. So we have an authority to operate process within the Department of Defense. So as printers and AM warehouses come online, they have to get approval through the CIO procedures to be able to connect. So I think that's the first fail-safe that we go through.
And part of that is a cyber kind of
that
screening,
is the cyber
right?
screening, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And how about do you see on the industry perspective, John? Do you see that any cybersecurity playing kind of hesitancy role in industry solutions, or is there a concern, or is that is it just something that
there are many concerns from a cyber point of view for additive, for some of the things that were mentioned? And I mean, the potential threat vectors in additive are, I don't know that they're any more or less than anything else, but there are plenty of them. There's a number of different programs, some of which we're deeply involved with, others that we're aware of that the services are running, that are all, trying to understand this problem more. And I would say for each of them, they pretty openly share the information so the community can understand how to react, and where, there's a lot of opportunity to address some of the things that were just brought up, where we can tell that if someone does introduce a file that does not match the native file, I know people who could detect that today. You know, there's a lot of things, but the reality is, because I know them, or, you know, the community who's in it every day understands it, that means absolutely nothing to, you know, the machine shop or the small business that started to, you know, provide brakes to somebody, you know, for a Humvee. And again, as everything gets bigger and use expands dramatically, hopefully, you know, we all want that, the problems compound. So I think we're learning a lot today. This is a very active space where we are, you know, all of us collectively across industry and working very closely with government are trying to understand how to protect everything from the machines to access points to the transfer of files to, I mean, more extreme measures maybe where we're able to collect data off of a part after it's built to understand whether it has something in it that, you know, a counterfeiter wouldn't necessarily know needs to be there. So there's a lot of ways to address these problems. Again, like anything, it's about, you know, where is our problems? How do we take them on as a community? I think that for us, that's exactly where we're trying to position ourselves. What is it that we can be working on and then ultimately sharing so that people can adopt it and then use it within their systems moving forward.
Okay. Great. One of the, we'll get to your question in just a second, Aaron. So one of the documents that was in your registration email, the invite, that we had some background reading in there, which included the instruction, but another piece was in there with the DoD Additive Roadmap, which was published earlier this year. I wonder if you all could comment on how were you involved in that, and what's your kind of view or perspective of that roadmap and how it fits in.
So I wasn't personally, but actually my staff was. So
Okay.
I mentioned the partnership with our research and science and engineering side in Air Force acquisition, and all the way down through the Air Force acquisition, engaged in that development. And I really think it brings all the elements for the strategy together, from the twofold, like I mentioned at the beginning, to the workforce, to the tools. So I think it's was much needed and well overdue. So I'm excited to see it moving forward, and how that applies within the Air Force too, as we take that on, internalize within our rapid sustainment office.
Okay. Yeah. Again, so I would refer folks to the strategy, the roadmap that is published under your office, Tracy. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, just one comment on it. So the strategy is based on work that started, you know, years ago. Out of many road mapping sessions, there was an initial DoD integrated additive manufacturing roadmap that was done in 2016, and then kind of individually refreshed from that point forward with the services. And you know, that was something that the Institute was involved with and worked across really all of the services to generate that, and then kind of transitioning that into the strategy is what, you know, came out this year. But again, it all, we use this phrase, convene, coordinate, and catalyze. This coordination piece is so important. So everyone wants to work on what's needed. We just need to know what's needed. And this idea of coordinating is, you know, we use, you know, this term of roadmap, maybe it's the right term or not, but it at least creates some kind of common language that we can all talk to. And you can understand these are the big buckets that are most important to you. And that starts to get everyone aligned. And then now those are starting to translate into strategies and now into policy. And then they're working into guidebooks. So we're able to take them and someone can pick it up and have an understanding. And you didn't have to be in the room down in Tyson's Corner back in 2016 when we did that. You know, there was 100 people there. That's not good enough. So I think these are all important steps. Again, it's all about continuing to work them together, you know, between government and academia and the industry side of things.
I wonder if I can push you a little bit on that. So you can talk a bit about America Makes was created as, you know, this you know, public-private partnership. and where you have kind of, you have government sponsors or, partners, and then you have within America Makes. How have you found that model to work, engaging with industry, engaging with academia, and engaging with the government? You can, I'm sure there's been some warts, but also some goodness. So anyway, so if you could talk a little bit about
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's went pretty well. We're about to hit our 9th anniversary or birthday here in a couple of weeks. So there's been plenty of ups and downs along the way, but overall, I think everyone has wanted something like this where we can come together and talk. And early on, it was all about trying to just put some flags out and start moving forward. That's, midway through the existence of the Institute, we really got focused on what are individual needs within services, and they would work directly with us to identify a set of requirements that all happen to be tied back to all the various roadmaps, but that we then put out to the community. So we have these, again, we use this term catalyst, but these targeted, directed projects to go address this. And then that's now moved forward where we're piecing those together, where we're getting to the point where we have advanced capabilities that we had. So that there's not enough money to just go solve all the problems. It is about picking things off that need to be done next. So through that, I think it's all worked very well. We have a fantastic membership, over 225 different members. And it's very diverse from every major OEM you can imagine, as a DoD contractor is in there. And I think at this point, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of our members are small businesses or, nonprofits, those kinds of groups. So it's very diverse as far as membership. And the thing that we hear back from them, probably for the 5th year running now through our annual engagement or surveys that we do, is our ability to bring everyone together to understand the problems is what's the most impactful thing for them still today. No matter how much funding's gone through the Institute, it's all about knowing what you need and trying to understand, am I in the position that I can help, or can I go team up with somebody to do that? And whether it's, it's great if it's funded with us because it makes sense and it's pre-competitive, and then we can share that. And there's lots of other, collisions that happen after we get done here and we go have a conversation about what we could do directly together because of a need you came to meet with. So the experiment, I would say, from our point of view, at least, has gone very well. We're very excited. We started planning our 10th and we're skipping 9. We're going right to 10 next year. And it's a big deal, I think, for this concept as a whole. There's 16 different institutes now of various technologies across defense, energy, and commerce. So something's working. Certainly there's obstacles that we run into, but.
Great. Sorry, there's a little digression, but I thought it was worthwhile. So the whole Institute framework, when I was in government, I managed it, oversaw it. And the interesting thing that's about it for the audience's perspective is that it's built off the model that in Germany called the Fraunhofer Institutes, where they have kind of these networks, and then Project, what is it called in the UK? Catapult, right? Where they have these government-funded labs that also have private funding. But the model in the U.S. with these institutes was to do 5 years of federal funding, of dedicated funding from the central level, and then for these institutes to become self-sustaining. As John has said, they're coming up on their 10th anniversary. So the fact that they're continuing beyond that and develop their own relationships with different departments in the Department of Defense and other agencies, I think it's a testament to that. And frankly, from my perspective, if we can't do something like this in a field such as additive manufacturing, can't do anything. There's enough demand signal. But great questions. Question here on digital engineering. Digital engineering expanding the scope of what is included in the tech data package, and technology continues to evolve. This acquisition guidance has been developed for specifying data deliverables or options for the deferred delivery to support additive over a long life cycle.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I think the question was, is digital engineering being included in the to support additive? Has that been included in acquisition guidance?
In this instruction,
Not in this instruction, no, but essentially is additive being folded into how we do acquisition across the department?
I would say unilaterally, yes. Has it made it into an instruction? I don't believe so. So the Air Force launched into a digital campaign a couple years ago and just recently issued some guidance on digital acquisition and what that means. And we have everything from individually digitally designed modification programs into a digital acquisition into an E-series acquisition. So if I talk about, so my portfolio sustainment, so the A-10 wing replacement program was an E program. So it was digitally designed. So by building those models and having that expertise, it allows the facilitation of AM parts into the way ahead on that acquisition program. So I see them part of the same problem and solution set. Whether or not, I can't speak for within the lower engineering within Air Force Material Command, whether they've embraced that at the lower levels, but I can tell you it's part and parcel of the same question and answer. So if you have a digital model and you can design things digitally, why wouldn't you incorporate additive as you can? Not only from, on the design, manufacturing things like we never could before, but from if it's a modification program on a redesign activity as well. So to John's point, right now it's you replace a part with a part. Can we redesign a family of parts to replace with one? So I think that all fits into exactly where the Air Force is headed with digital acquisition. So I'd say the answer is, if not already, then yes, it's coming.
I think, Aaron, you had a follow-on question, right? Yeah, well, you got a mic right there.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. So my question is now following on and more looking for like kind of the industry perspective and what discussions industry has had among themselves, and maybe talking with buyers, with customers, with sponsors, is how it could change, and maybe there's even like a preferred model emerging for how industry would like to receive a demand signal. And let's just say on the production side, re-engineering and digital acquisitions model-based, great. But let's just say you have a part and you have inconsistent demand, or you need to produce it forward, or you just want it cheaper. And AM is one of many techniques, right? It could be cast, it could be extruded, or it could be 3D printed. But the way we typically communicate to industry right now to get production is, I have a product in NSN or something like that, and hopefully it meets some safety specs and some regs, right, for product quality. But otherwise, I want a quantity, and I want the price for it, and some kind of delivery schedule. But you can imagine that AM opens up really interesting ideas for like a digital contract with industry that says, maybe I want to distribute that manufacturing across congressional districts for some reason. Or maybe I want to give you as a manufacturer, a vendor, an opportunity to say, you gave me a requirement for a delivery schedule. What if I give you something more nuanced in terms of like reserved capacity? Or maybe I even, to the last question, I don't ship you a part. I ship you the 3D file and you license it, and then you can produce it at qualified printers across the service, if that's a thing. So what discussion can you talk to that the industry may be having about changing the way that we issue a demand signal, both on paper and just qualitatively?
Comes to me. So very, very interesting question. Lots to unpack there, I would say. If we had a sharp guy from DLA, maybe we could have that conversation. I think we're having a lot of those conversations. I mean, we participate, and we just wrapped up a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and within that workshop for the last few years, there has been discussion around how do we get information to the manufacturing base, and what is the model, and that takes on a lot of different faces. But right now it's, I need a widget, I need X number of them, like you described, and there is not an option whether you can make it a different way or not, or you can make it out of bubble gum or whatever would be acceptable, because in most cases, well, I'll say in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily requirements based, where you get instead a set of drawings or specifications that you have to make it to. So there's zero opportunity for innovation, really. So I would say, in talking to lots of folks from industry, and in particular, I would say on the small business side, there's much interest in trying to address these problems. And again, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but they're wanting someone to tell them that here's my problem, let me try to figure it out. And there's a lot of different innovative, challenges going on. I think the government has embraced that approach to trying to explore, are there options that are different? There's some different programs within DLA, or my understanding of it, where they're investigating that specifically around additive manufacturing. So, one way to maybe talk around the question a little bit is this concept that Angie brought up around part families, is because that's when you can really start to scale your question out. It's not about the individual gear widget. It's about something that has this set of requirements, and is there a different way to do it? There's been dreams for years of being able to just post requirements like that and let the community respond. I would maybe throw that at our acquisition professionals or to Angie about how do we get to that point? I don't know. I think the community is ready to innovate. It's difficult to put the information in front of them so that they can.
Yeah, and I would say it's almost an unfair question to ask industry, because it's a culture change that needs to happen within the government to allow that to happen, to allow distributed operations, to give them that flex space they need to go design. Again, form, fit, function, right? We do form, fit, function replacements. You and DLA would know that. Is an AM part the same form? It's probably the fit and the function, but if it's a direct part, is it the same form? We actually have those debates going on right now. So I would, there's one activity that John personally was involved in, and my boss, that I'll mention, is maybe a little microcosm on how we started that conversation. So Air Force is, I'm going to forget the term, executive agent for America Makes. And we are also executive agent for the Defense Production Act. So when we were as a nation the COVID response team, it was John and America Makes that the Air Force turned to and said, there's all this 3D printing capability. We don't have manufacturing in the United States. Can we leverage 3D printing to give us ventilator parts, for example? And so it was John pulling those teams together, the Air Force saying, we have the DPA funds, we have this Manufacturing Institute. Can we create a tech data package and push it out to the industry so they can go print parts on demand? So it was the beginning of the conversation, I think, but it was starting to say we have this great consortium out there that we can leverage, and we need to start thinking differently about how we manufacture things. So lessons learned. Took a pandemic for us to start down that path, but I don't see an end to that. We've now had our eyes open, and again, it's the culture change internally before we can accept the things that industry is already ready and willing to do.
Great question, and great questions all around. We're running out of time, so I just want to give each of the panelists a chance to sum up. Before I do that, I want to specifically thank Carla O'Connor, who's got more attention than she probably wants from DAU, and Kelly Visconti from OSD R&E. They're the ones that have been reached out to us to help set up this event, and it's been a real pleasure working with them on this and partnering with America Makes on this event, because it's, as you can see, with the participation, robust, really important issue, and now is really set to launch. But any closing comments from you, starting with you, John?
Sure. Obviously, thanks to everyone. Certainly appreciate this opportunity. I think this is just another step in the journey together between the community, and that's what we pride ourselves on: three things: doing the technical side of things, which I think lots of people understand and get their heads around. Maybe a little less understandable is the educational side of things, but we've heard repeatedly here how important that is. As we have technology that we can actually rely on, now we need someone who can use it. But the third piece is this idea of ecosystem. So how are we putting a community in place that is really tying all the pieces together? So for us, that really is, and we really take to heart this public-private partnership concept and the the term, where we're trying to bring everyone together to understand, and maybe COVID was the best example. Where are their problems? Where are their capabilities? How do we start to move that all around? I mean, there's a bunch of people in this room that were some of my first calls to say, hey, and you quickly realized and having that ability to reach across government and then reach down into industry and academia is I think truly a very important asset for the country. It's now about continuing to put things into motion around policy so that we can take advantage of them and build the supply chain to take advantage of it all.
AmericanMakes.org, is that your website?
AmericanMakes.us.
US.
So I was super happy that there was a strategy. And, so I'll mention Carla's name again. She's like, oh my God, we have a strategy. And now we have a policy. I'll put myself on a report. I didn't even know there was a roadmap. I'm going to go find it. I apologize, but roadmaps are super important. And then there's also a guidebook out there. And one of the elements of the guidebook is an element of crowdsourcing, which I think is really important. You can't just give crowdsourcing lip service. You don't get credit for just mentioning it, right? You got to get the crowd together, right? So that's this ecosystem that John just mentioned. I think the DAU can play a part in that. We certainly have more access to the acquisition workforce than probably any other component in DoD, to be quite honest. Okay, all the services, all the agencies, you are going to pass through DAU, and this is an important way for us to be able to support, again, what I'll say the spirit and intent of this policy. We are going through a substantial change in DAU in terms of who we deliver training to and how we deliver that training. And it starts with things like making this learning frictionless for the workforce, making it easier for the workforce to get the training that they need. I would say for anybody involved in this policy, count on that. And if you don't think it's frictionless, then call us out on that. We need to be called out. The next thing is to make sure that it's world-class content. How do we get that world-class content? Well, we have some great people that are probably online, great people that are here in the theater. But what we really want to do is be able to tap into the services, get your folks, come in and talk to our folks at DAU, talk to the folks that are coming to DAU. Industry as well, really, really important for us to bring them in. And the last thing that Jim Woolsey, our president, wants us to do is to exercise a dynamic network. And that's why participating in events like this, it's critically important. And I really appreciate the invitation for DAU to be able to participate in that and be a part of it. Thanks.
One point that I wanted to foot stomp that didn't come clear, at least in my comments on the panel, was the importance of this DoDI in terms of getting the services all aligned, right? So we as an Air Force have a very strong partner in American Makes, and we understand the industry piece on that. We probably weren't the best at coordinating with our sister services and moving lessons learned, specs and standards. Things were going on in pockets. But what this drives is now we're going to have these metrics and processes in place that we as a department are going to use. So it's an all ships rise kind of approach, and we will have lessons learned. We talked about the BIN model within the Marines. Can we adopt some of that? What's the Navy doing? What's the Army doing? And really leverage our expertise across the services. And I think I give credit to the CODs. I say thank you.
Great. I'm sorry we've gone a bit over, but thank you very much, panelists, for all your great comments. And look for the new channel on AM. And I want to thank Tracy Frost for her leadership of this DoDI and leadership of this effort and her comments this morning. And look forward to seeing you all again soon. We're going to have, again, the partnership with DAU continues. We're going to do our conference on November 3rd, which will be in person and online. And so you can sign up for that, information on that on our website. And we'll have two events in September with an international flair. One is focused on defense exportability, and one is focusing on building U.S. industrial base resilience with a little help from our friends. How do we partner with allies and partners to build our industrial base? So look forward, stay tuned, and we'll see you again